Okay, welcome to Developmental Psychology. Today we're going over Chapter 11, not all of it actually, only half of it. Chapter 11, we're talking about middle childhood biosocial development. So we're on to the next period of development, which is actually ages 7 to 11 years of age. Okay, this is called middle childhood. And it's biosocial development. So we're going to talk about things that are biological and things related to things that are biological. Everything's related, but these are the things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about physical growth, physical activity, healthy time, exercise in school, obesity, asthma, a little bit about brain development. All that is only like 15 slides, and then developmental disorders and how to, and children with special needs, all that stuff we'll talk about on Monday. Okay, so let's talk about physical growth. Actually, it's ages 6 to 11 years of age. There's overlap, okay? The other one was 2 to 6. This one should be 7 to 11, but 6 to 11, that's the same thing, same period of time. So during this time, right, what do we have? Ages 6 to 11, 7 to 11. Children are still growing, okay? But physical growth slows down. They don't grow as fast anymore. But, it's still relatively fast growth. So most children are, will gain about 5-7 pounds per year, right? And about 2 inches of height per year. Some more, some less, right? But their growth slows down. And of course, as they get taller, they usually get slimmer, right? Their limbs lengthen, right? That's been happening even before that. And during this time, children look relatively slim. Not all children. We're going to talk about obesity too, okay? And there are problems, but a healthy child is mostly looks pretty slim during this time. Okay, because they're getting longer, okay? Their muscles become stronger as well, okay? A 10-year-old, for instance, can throw 2 times farther than a 6-year-old. So their muscles become a lot stronger. Their lung capacity expands, which means they can run faster, exercise longer. They can last longer. That's what that means, right? They have more stamina. And all that is due to lung capacity. Children, younger children, younger than this, are easily winded. They easily get tired. At this time, children have more stamina, more lung capacity. They can last longer, right? You can take them on a nice long hike, right? You can stay out there longer playing or swimming or whatever it is. Don't overdo it though, but they can last longer, okay? They have more skill in controlling the body as well. They're more graceful, more skillful. All that is improving. And by this time, they're pretty good at movement, okay? If they're athletic, they're pretty damn good by this time, okay? Just throw a comment out there. If you think your kid's going to be some professional or something like that, some professional athlete, by this time they should be blowing you away as far as how good they are. Okay? I mean, they should be really good at this time. But not all kids are that athletic. Some are more than others. And by the way, this is also a good time to travel. Okay? When they're little kids, they're very annoying. Okay? It's very hard to get along with them. They drive you crazy. This is a very good time to travel. Okay? They're big enough, old enough, right, to do a lot of things well, to follow directions, to be well behaved, and they're still not yet teenagers. They're not yet teenagers. And when they become teenagers, they're going to drive you crazy. When they become teenagers, they're a pain again. This is a very good time to travel and go on vacation if you can afford that. Okay? But you still have to watch them, okay? They can still get hurt and get into trouble, okay? But by this time, it's a lot better. It's a healthier time, okay? More about physical activity. I'll talk about it being a healthier time in a moment. Physical activity. So, it's good that children get a lot of physical activity that keeps them healthy, keeps them slim, right? You don't want them to be obese. We'll talk about that in a moment. But both physical activity and play contribute to good health. Okay, this is actually a very healthy time. We'll talk about health separately in a moment. Okay. During this time, children have better overall health. Okay, they're usually pretty healthy. If they had issues when they were younger, by this time they probably have adapted, adjusted, or overcome a lot of those issues, okay? There's less obesity during this time, okay? So children are slimmer, they get longer, less obesity during this time. My daughter's around this age. She's about age 8, she's gonna be 9, and she's overweight. She's in, we'd have to weigh her again, I guess, but I think she's in the obese range, okay? We'll talk about that separately in a moment. But this is the time when children should look pretty slim and they should be pretty healthy, okay? Good time to travel, right? They're a lot better at things, okay? And usually healthy. They appreciate more cooperation and fair play, so they're better able to follow the rules, better able to problem solve and get along with others, right? Less tantrums, right? More respect for teammates and opponents, and even respect of people of different ethnicities, different nationalities, right? If they learn that, if you encourage that, right? This is a time when, you know, children are pretty well behaved, healthy, pretty capable. It's a very good time, you know, during this time to be a parent, okay? It's not as hard to deal with them during this time. It's a good time to travel, like I said. But of course, there's a pandemic going on, and you know, you shouldn't do it right now. But yeah, that's what you have. It's a healthy time. Middle childhood is a very healthy time. It's the healthiest period of the entire lifespan. This is when people are the least likely to die during this time. And you can see, first look at the bottom graph. The bottom graph, you can see as people get older, they're more likely to die. That's what the bottom graph shows, okay? Yes, older people are more likely to die, right, than younger people. But if you look at the period of time of if you look at a graph that's a little bit, I guess, centered on the first 20 years, you can see that children are more likely to die early on when they're like actually 1 year of age or actually a few months old, and then it declines, okay? And then it kind of stabilizes, and then it goes down even more. The likelihood of children dying goes down even more from about age 8 to about 12, and then rises after that as they enter adolescence and they start doing stupid things, okay? And they get into more trouble. They're less likely to die during this period of time, okay? And why is that? A lot of different things. It's a healthier time, less risky time for children. Part of it has to do with immunizations. Children hopefully have gotten their immunizations by this time. That has reduced deaths dramatically, okay? It's saved a lot of lives. Please don't be an anti-vaxxer, okay? Don't put your children's health at risk, okay? This is science, it's not opinion, okay? Immunizations work, okay? But other things as well. Serious accidents are a lot less common, okay? By this time, children are less likely to drown. They're less likely to get hit by a car because they're gonna look before crossing the street. They're less likely to do stupid things that are getting them into trouble, okay? They're more likely to think before they act. So there's less serious accidents, right? And by this time, if they do fall in the pool, they can still drown, but a lot of children can swim by this time. Or if they do fall in, you know, they're more likely to be able to pull themselves out. You should still watch them. You still shouldn't have 7-year-olds or 10-year-olds using the pool without supervision, okay? But they're just less likely to drown. Less fatal diseases, okay? They've had their immunizations, they've had their checkups and stuff like that. They're more likely to be healthy, okay? Fatal diseases, you know, usually get children earlier, okay? Even minor diseases are less common during this time. There's less exposure to toxins, less secondhand smoke, especially nowadays, okay? Children are more able to basically, they can think better. They're more able to move away from things that are dangerous or even secondhand smoke or tell you not to smoke around them or that that's bad and that kind of stuff, right? Less exposure to that stuff, okay? But some children are still exposed more to toxins than others. Even hearing problems, you know, should have been diagnosed and treated, you know, by this time. Anemia, which is basically when they're anemic, they're kind of weak, they get easily tired. It has to do with the blood, right? All those problems should have been diagnosed and treated earlier, so by this time they should be a lot better. Even oral care, right? Brushing their teeth, all that stuff has improved with education, better toothpaste, better toothbrushes, all that stuff. It's a very healthy time for children. It's a very good time, I would say. It's a time when you can have a lot of fun with them, enjoy your kids a lot, travel with them. Before that, they're a pain. After this, they're more of a pain when they become teenagers. But some kids are better than others. Some kids might be good when they're teenagers. Others might be really bad. Exercise in school, exercise in general is a very good thing. We all know that. That's common sense, right? But physical education and recess are sometimes being replaced with reading and math. There's been this emphasis lately that children need to just learn how to read, how to write, how to do math, and they're taking away that physical education time and basically taking away also art and music and that stuff, but even physical education. And research shows us that's actually a very bad thing, okay? Children need a lot of physical activity. They want to run around and play, and it's actually good for them, not just physically, but also mentally, okay? APA, the American Psychological Association, recommends that suggests that recess is a critical component of child development. Children are actually more ready to learn if they've had physical activity, if they've had a break where they got a chance to play, right, and run around. Actually helps them learn, as opposed to just keeping them indoors and having them learn throughout, and they don't get much of a time to just play and have a break. And then after a while, they're fed up and they're not paying attention. They can't really focus. Eliminating recess may actually reduce overall mastery of reading and math. If you get rid of that physical activity, you can actually make those skills go down. Okay, physical activity is actually very important. The brain doesn't just need, you know, cognitive things, okay? It doesn't just need things that have to do with thinking and learning. It also needs physical activity, needs physical exercise. Physical exercise is good for the brain, okay? It's not just good for the body, but also good for the brain. It increases blood flow and improves learning and all those things, okay? Now, there are children who have problems with obesity. We're gonna talk about that, okay? But first we need to determine what makes somebody obese, okay? How do you know if somebody's obese? Well, you need to know about something called body mass index. Body mass index is basically, there's several ways to calculate it, but one way to calculate it is to take the person's body weight in kilograms and divide it by the square of their height in meters. So what you should do first is find out your height, convert that to meters, because over here in the US we use inches and feet, convert that to meters. And basically there's 39 inches in a meter. Convert that to meters, okay? Square that, multiply times itself, and then take your weight in kilograms and divide that by the square of your height in meters, okay? And you'll get some number that tells you what your body mass index is, okay? But it's different for children. The body mass index isn't necessarily that accurate for children because it's different. The body mass index works better for adults. So for your child, if you want to know if your child is obese or overweight, then you need to look at the percentile, not so much the ratio of the body mass index. But if your child is overweight, that means your child has a BMI your child's in the 85th percentile or more. And I think my daughter's around there. She's overweight. I don't think she's at the obese range. If your child is obese, that means they're really overweight, okay? They're obese, okay? That's a BMI, body mass index, above the 95th percentile. What that means is that 95% of children that your child's age actually weigh less than your child. Your child is in the top 5% as far as how much they weigh, and that is not a good thing. Overweight, they're 85th percentile or above, okay? You want to be close to the middle, of course, 50th percentile, I'm around there, but if you're a little bit higher, still okay. Some children weigh more than others. Some children are taller, but you know, well, if your child's in the 85th percentile or above, they're overweight. If they're 95th percentile or above, then they're obese, okay? And obesity is becoming a big problem, okay? We have a lot of kids now that are obese. It used to be just that you had a couple of chubby kids in the class, right? A couple of kids that were obese. Now there's like a third of them, okay? It's becoming a big problem. And why is that? We're gonna talk about that. Well, about 32% of kids are now overweight, okay? And about 18% of them are obese in the US. That kid you see right there, that kid is obese. That's not just overweight. That kid is obese, okay? That means he's really overweight. He's severely overweight, okay? So about a third of the kids that you look in the classrooms now are basically, you know, chubby kids or overweight. They're way too much, okay? And about 18% of them are severely obese, are obese basically. That means that they weigh much more, and so much that basically it could have health consequences. Obesity has health consequences. Obesity increases the risk of diabetes. There's actually even childhood diabetes now. Okay, now diabetes comes in two forms, type 1 and type 2. Type 1 has to do with abnormal cells that you can't help, that's just biological. Type 2 has to do with basically being obese. And having diabetes during childhood used to be completely unheard of. And now it's common. Now we have kids that have diabetes, which is ridiculous. But that's because of this obesity epidemic. They're more likely to have a stroke, get heart disease, cancer, and die. They probably won't die when they're kids, but it increases the chance of all of that. Okay, they already have health problems as kids. That is ridiculous. Okay, health problems from diabetes. From obesity, which can lead to diabetes and other things like that. School achievement and even their self-esteem increases. What happens is basically because they're overweight, they're obese, especially if they're obese, they feel bad about themselves, right? Kids tease them, call them names, right? It lowers their self-esteem, and when they lowers their self-esteem, they don't believe as much in themselves, and they're less likely to try, and they're like, you know, their school achievement can suffer. Not always, not all kids that are obese are gonna be bad at school or anything like that, but those are risks, right? Usually kids that are overweight, obese, especially those that are obese, have lower self-esteem, and sometimes it affects their school achievement. A lot of them are lonely. They're less, you know, they're less likely to have friends. You know, they will have friends, but kids will also tease them and pick on them and leave them out sometimes. They're more likely to be lonely. They feel that other kids don't like them as much. It's harder for them to make friends because they feel that children are going to pick on them and tease them. And a lot of children do. Children are really mean. Teenagers are even worse, right? But children can be mean. And what's going on? Why do we have such an obesity epidemic? There's a lot of things, okay? There's several things. It's a complicated thing, but there are some things that we can do something about and other things we cannot. Genetics, biology, we can't really do too much about, but some children are, you know, children, right? Or some people in general are just more genetically predisposed to be obese than others. Some people, you know, gain weight more easily than others. And that's just the way it is. My son and daughter, right? They have the same diet. Only one of them is overweight. And my other son, he's not, but he's more active also. And, you know, he probably has a slightly different genetics. Okay. So heredity has something to do with it. Okay. Both me and my wife are slim. Okay. But I will tell you that on my wife's side of the family, and my wife would get mad for me saying this, on my wife's side of the family, everybody is, and not just overweight, I would say obese, everyone. Her dad, her mom passed away. She was obese. Her sister, she has 3 sisters, all of them. But my wife is not like that. My wife is scrawny and thin. Part of the reason for that is because my wife actually has cerebral palsy. She has slight cerebral palsy. And those that have cerebral palsy are more likely to be thin and scrawny. They have problems with movement, and their brain affects movement. It's, you know, motor cortex damage. So my wife, basically, I'm saying is she has those genetics, but it's probably not showing because of that. If my wife didn't have that, maybe she'd be the same way. I don't know. But I know that genetics is there, and my daughter seems to have it, and my son, not so much. But beyond that, there's other things that matter. Parenting, right, also matters. Infants that are not breastfed are more likely to basically to, you know, to be obese later on. Those that, of course, that watch too much TV and are sitting on their butts, right? They're not exercising. They're not playing. Well, they might be playing video games, but they're not getting much activity. Drinking a bunch of soda, no exercise, poor family eating habits. What is your family eating? A bunch of stuff that comes in boxes? Probably bad, okay? Whether it's that box of fried chicken, right? Those taquitos, those, or you make, or other stuff, even if you cook stuff, the quesadillas, the burgers, right? You know, the French fries, all that stuff, all bad, right? And we learn our eating habits from our parents. I fight a lot with my wife about this sort of stuff, about the parenting. Okay, I have less influence on the kids than she does because she's really, you know, she's just the way she is. She's the mother, and she just takes control and she takes charge. And it's gotten to the point where I don't even eat what they eat anymore because it's bad. I told her, hey, I have to watch my cholesterol. I'm older. I have to watch myself. I can't be eating all that stuff you guys are eating. And by the way, we're vegetarian. But yeah, there's pizza night, you know, there's quesadillas. I mean, there's mashed potatoes and with, you know, with vegetarian gravy, stuff like that. They eat a bunch of crap, okay? And I refuse to eat that stuff, okay? And while my wife is fine, my son's fine, it's affecting my daughter. And we've had a lot of arguments over this, but yes, diet is important, and you learn your diet from your parents, right? And nowadays we have a culture of convenience. We want everything convenient. If it's easy to make, easy to prepare, it's probably bad for you, okay? Good food takes, you know, usually takes longer to make. It's natural food. But anyway, all that relates to parenting and eating habits and all that stuff. But there's also other social influences that, you know, that you may not think that much about. School lunches, you know, most of the lunch that kids get at school is actually not good for them. I don't know if they've changed it. In some places it's changed, but I remember growing up, it would be basically quesadillas, burritos, burgers, hot dogs, you know. We only got one real meal a year, and that was during Thanksgiving, like around Thanksgiving week. They'd give us turkey, okay? They'd give us the turkey and the mashed potatoes and the gravy. It was good. I wouldn't say it's healthy, but the turkey is somewhat healthy, right? But all the other time, it's just junk food, okay? And I think a lot of that's still going on. But I do remember that the portions were small. I mean, we were pretty much hungry all the time because it just wasn't enough calories. So I wouldn't blame it so much on the school lunches. They usually don't feed you enough, you know, to really make you overweight, although the food isn't very healthy. I do blame snacks, snack machines. A lot of snack machines now at school, right? You can buy those chips, you can buy those sodas. Actually, I think they got rid of those, okay? But people would buy this at school. But it's not just the stuff that people eat at school. It's the stuff that people eat at home, okay? It's those snacks that you eat at home. You know, the snacks, you know, whether it's the candy bars, or the potato chips, you know, the burgers, the fries, all that stuff. I think it's mostly the stuff that you guys eat outside of school, to tell you the truth, because at school, they don't give you a feast. They give you some food, but I mean, even though it's not healthy. Because I remember I was thin and I was hungry all the time. I'd come home and rush home to eat after coming home from school because they just didn't feed us enough, right? A couple of little tacos or a burrito or something like that, a couple of quesadillas. It wasn't a lot of food, even for a kid, okay? But anyway, it's still bad food, still junk food. But, you know, there's a lot, but even other influences like subsidies for corn, but not fresh veggies, food advertising. Think about what you see on TV, right? Think about all the stuff that they try to sell us. Go to the supermarket and you'll see the influence of all that stuff. Most of the stuff they sell at the supermarket is extremely bad for you, extremely fattening, too much fat, too much sugar, too much salt. And there's only a small portion of the stuff in the supermarket that's actually healthy. Most of the stuff that's packaged is really bad, and most food is packaged nowadays. If you want to watch a good documentary on that, watch that up on Netflix. You can learn about the subsidies, basically how the government pays all these, you know, provides money for these companies to produce stuff that's really bad for you, okay? And that makes part of school lunches and things like that. There's a lot of stuff, okay? But in general, there's a problem with our diet, and there's too much money being made on stuff that's just bad. It's tasty, it's addicting, all that food, but it's really bad for you. It's hard to have healthy eating habits, okay? More about obesity. Another reason for obesity is that there's slower growth rate. Children are not growing as fast. They don't need as many calories, but during this time, right, they eat a lot of junk. Those cookies, those chips, like I said, those hot dogs, those hamburgers. A lot of people, their diet is just junk food. That's just the way a lot of the, you know, the influence that we have now, a lot of stuff we've learned, the American diet is mostly just junk food. And we need to think differently about how we eat, okay? It's very hard to change those patterns, by the way. Even I fell victim to that. And now I had to make changes now that I'm older. When you're young and, you know, most children will be okay because you're still growing and, you know, you can still be a normal, healthy weight, but eventually it'll catch up with you as an adult, okay? But for some kids, they're already in trouble, even during this time. Obese preteens, right? And teens have a 64% chance of becoming an obese adult. Not all obese kids will become obese adults, but most of them, 2/3. And when you're an obese adult, well, that's really bad, okay? You need to deal with that. You need to get rid of that, or it's gonna shorten your life. It's gonna make all kinds of things more likely. Cancer and heart disease and stroke and all kinds of stuff. It will really shorten your life, okay? How do we avoid obesity? There's a lot of common sense here, but it sounds easy, but it's really hard, okay? You have to limit television viewing and snacking, okay? We spend too much time sitting on our butts watching TV rather than being out there playing, right? Or doing stuff. As kids, we do that, but you know, even as adults, too much time in front of the TV. They learn that habits from us, okay? You're on your tablet nowadays, on your phone, and they're doing the same thing. They're on their tablets, and they're on the TV, on the computer, whatever it is, okay? And you're sitting and you're not really getting much exercise. Too much snacking, the chips, the Doritos, we eat round the clock. It's another thing I fight with my wife about. It's like that she feeds the kids constantly. It's like the kids eat every couple of hours. And I tell her, like, why are you doing this? Stop doing this. Like, let the kids get hungry for their next meal. Like, let them get hungry. Don't feed them all the time. But she thinks they're kids, they have to eat. You know, it's like, no, they don't need to eat all the time, okay? Encourage physical activity year round, okay? Sometimes it's harder when it's really hot or really smoky, if there's fires, or if it's really cold, but there's always ways to do physical activity. Provide lots of fruits and vegetables, right? Give them some fruit rather than giving them a bag of chips, rather than giving them a candy bar, right? Rather than giving them that bag of chips, you know, or whatever it is, give them an apple, you know, give them a banana, give them that stuff, right? Yeah, try to make them fat by giving them fruits and vegetables, and you'll see what happens, right? You let them eat as much of that stuff as they want. Don't let them eat that other stuff, and you'll see what happens, okay? Watch fat intake, right? It's a concentrated source of calories. You know, those hot dogs, those hamburgers, that pizza, all that stuff that tastes really good, bad for you. But you know what? Fruit tastes good too. Fruit can be very satisfying. Vegetables, I know, don't taste that good, but you can make it satisfying. You need to make it part of a meal. It shouldn't just be junk food and snack food, but that's basically what we do as a society nowadays. We're a culture of convenience. We just eat stuff that's convenient, and it's really bad for us, and it's making us fat, and it's killing us is what it's doing. Avoid added sugar. Sugar is a big problem that a lot of people don't realize, okay? Sugar from fruit is okay because fruit also has fiber, which helps with digestion, okay? But guess what? That juice that you're giving your kids, you think juice is healthy? It is not. It's a bunch of sugar water is what it is. It's not much better than soda. The companies, the bottling companies and the food companies have fooled you into thinking that, okay, soda's bad, so okay, so you don't have to buy that. They still sell it, but it doesn't sell as much anymore. But they tricked you, and now there's a bunch of people buying juice. Juice sales are way up. You're just replacing one sugary drink with another. You've been tricked into thinking that it's healthy. It is not. You want something healthy? Drink some water. That's what's healthy, right? Don't drink juice, soda, or any sugary drinks. It's bad for your kids. It's making them fat. It's making you fat if you're doing this stuff. If I were you, I would drink water, milk, right? But guess what? That lemonade, that orange juice, all those other sugary drinks, all full of sugar. Bad, really bad, okay? We don't need that much sugar. It's a lot of sugar. I mean a lot that they put in that stuff. Why do you think it tastes so good? And all this, sugar is linked with obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, cancer. Sugar leads to all these things. It's really bad, and that's from the American Heart Association. Avoid packaged food, even low-fat, so-called healthy food. Is it really healthy? It's bad. They tell you, oh, it's reduced fat. Doesn't mean it's actually good for you. They took away the fat and replaced it with a bunch of sugar. Sometimes it says, or it may say something like, I don't know, it might say something like light. Light doesn't always mean it has less calories. They've done studies sometimes on some of these packaging stuff and some of these packages, and sometimes light just means that it's lighter in color. It's not actually, doesn't actually have less calories. Sometimes it does, but packaged food is usually not good for you. You need to eat single ingredient food. And there's few foods that come in a package that's single ingredient. But one example would be like, like raw oats, oatmeal, okay? Oatmeal, like, you get that Quaker box or bag of, oatmeal. Okay, that's actually single ingredient food that comes in a package. But most food that comes in a package is food they've added a bunch of sugar, a bunch of fat, a bunch of salt, or something. It's not good for you mostly. There's few things that are. But if you get a bag of walnuts, a box, well, that's usually okay, right? Even though you think of nuts as being fattening, they're actually good for you. You need moderate to vigorous exercise. 2.5 hours per week is what is recommended. Your kids can get that by playing very easily, right? But you need that. You need to do that. And if you're already overweight, obese, and you want to lose some weight, you want your kids to lose weight, you're going to have to work really hard, right? Their diet, you need to use, make sure you fix their diet and make them exercise a lot, okay? And by a lot, I mean they should be getting at least an hour of very vigorous activity every day. It's hard to lose weight. You need both diet and exercise. It's not that easy. And once you're there, your body's gonna fight you, okay? It doesn't want you to lose weight. It's used to a certain weight and it wants to keep you there. It's your set point, okay? It's hard, okay? And we live in a culture that encourages us to be overweight and obese. All right, so let's talk about something else. Let's talk about asthma. Asthma is a problem that does affect children, even children of this age. It's something that, it's a chronic inflammatory disorder of the airways that makes it difficult to breathe. So your air passages, inside you basically gets, red and swollen, okay? And what causes this is kind of, there's different things, okay? But your airways are getting inflamed. It's almost like an allergic reaction. But signs could include like wheezing, shortness of breath, chest tightness, and coughing, right? If you have asthma, you kind of know it. You experience this. You might need an inhaler or something like that. What's causing it? Some experts suggest that there's a hygiene hypothesis, right? For the current increase in all allergies, that basically we're overprotecting our kids from germs and all that stuff. We're cleaning all these surfaces with all these chemicals and basically getting rid of all these things that children could otherwise, their immune systems could otherwise become used to. You know, that basically we're protecting our kids, that they need more exposure to these germs and stuff like that so they can actually, their immune system can get stronger. That's one hypothesis. But there's also other things that suggest that it may be other things like pollution and what's actually in the air that's actually causing these reactions. There was a study done on asthma where they imposed traffic restrictions. And I don't know what city this was, but they imposed traffic restrictions, encouraged a lot of people to carpool and use mass transit. They made mass transit free for 17 days. And when you make something free, people will use it. They will go there and they'll pack those buses and those trains very tight if you make it free. And they did that, okay, for 17 days. The results are that there was a drop in the incidence of acute asthma. Asthma dropped. Asthma treatments, Medicare asthma treatments dropped 42%. HMO asthma treatment down 44%. Air pollution in general makes asthma worse, right? All that smog, all that stuff coming out the tailpipe of cars, of basic gasoline cars and the stuff from factories, all that stuff. And remember, who's likely to live in places where this is more of a problem? It's always poor kids, right? More minority kids than white kids. There are poor white kids, but it's mostly people and kids that are poor, and they're the ones who are most likely to suffer from asthma. It's inflammation of the airways. Okay, it's another problem. But I think there's one more slide on asthma. Actually, there was one thing. Let me tell you something about asthma. I looked at something more about asthma. Asthma was predicted to go up years ago, decades ago. They were expecting asthma was just going to get worse and worse, right? Because there's going to be more people with asthma, because as air pollution gets worse and there's more cars and all that stuff, it would get worse. And now they have to change their predictions because now we have more renewable energy. And actually things are getting better now. The air is getting cleaner and asthma levels are dropping. So thank God for that, right? Things are getting better. But it used to be worse. In LA in the 70s and 80s, before they passed all those clean air laws, LA was under a blanket of smog. Basically, it looked like there was a big brown blanket over LA. It was worse back then. They passed a bunch of laws to clean up the air. Go look at the air now. I'm not saying it's healthy, but it looks a lot better now, and it's getting better every year. And it's getting better faster as renewable energy takes off. But as you know, there's people who are fighting this, right? Let's keep going. One more thing, and then we'll stop there. Let's talk a little bit about brain development. So we mentioned a lot of these things already, but there's a few extra things in here. But yes, sensory, your senses, motor functions, all that stuff are developing. They're continuing to improve. Movement, your senses are maybe not necessarily, but movement is definitely, motor function is definitely improving. Language is improving, memory, all that continues to improve as connections among neurons develop with experience, right? Remember, children need a lot of stimulation, okay? Education is a good thing. They also need stimulation outside of school, in the home and stuff like that. All that is good for them. The prefrontal cortex is developing further and will continue to develop up until your late teens, early 20s. And that will allow children to control their emotions better, right? Less tantrums, more self-control, right? More likely to, to stop themselves before crossing the street, right? And looking around. Better able for them to focus and maintain attention. All this is better, okay? All this makes things better. The ability to think, to stop and think. Selective attention, meaning attending to one thing and not other, improves, right? Children can pay better attention to one thing, like the teacher at school, right? And ignore other things, like the other children whispering or children misbehaving, right? All this is good for them. Automation improves, automation develops. Automation is basically when you do something over and over, and then it becomes automatic. The process where thoughts and actions that are repeated in sequence become automatic and then require little conscious thoughts. It's like basically reading. The more children read, the better they get at it, right? And eventually becomes automatic where they can look at something and read it instantly. Think about how good you are at reading now. And think about how children who are just learning to read, how they have to stop and go really slow, eventually becomes automatic. Writing becomes automatic. And the more you do something, the more the brain wires those connections and the more the brain's affected by experience, right, the more those pathways are strengthened, and then the less thought, the less effort they take to do those things. You get better at things as the brain basically develops, and as also with experience as well. Okay, that is where we will stop. Let me stop recording.